Welcome to this webinar hosted by Berkman Solutions. Your presenter today is Mark Little. Mark is a senior executive and corporate lawyer with over 20 years of experience in legal, compliance, and risk management technology. He has been a featured speaker and commentator on risk management and compliance around the world. Mark received his JD from Cornell Law School and BA from the University of Washington. Today's webinar is being recorded. The video will be available for later viewing at berkmansolutions.com. There will be a Q&A section at the end of the presentation. Now, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you for that kind introduction. This webinar on client engagement with legal entities will show you how to use the practice of legal entity management to increase client engagement and deliver more value to your business and corporate clients. We'll look at 3 examples: a startup with a couple of founders and an angel investor, a family office with many businesses in the family organization, and finally, a large multinational corporate client. In each of those examples, we'll identify principles of entity management that you can use to increase engagement and deliver more value. We'll demonstrate those principles inside a product called Registry for purposes of illustration. Let's turn to our startup founders. Our founders are going to form a company called Lemonade Software LLC. They are going to sell web-based software to people who are creating and running lemonade stands. So the brilliant idea for Lemonade Software LLC is the product of Abe and Helen Client. These are the individual founders. They have secured outside investing for Lemonade Software LLC from Angel Investor Co., which is the investment vehicle of an early stage investor. So in this example, there are a couple of principles we want to look at that are foundational to entity management. The first is that there is a single corporate registry. All of the legal entities, whether they're individuals or products of incorporation or legal formation, go in one place. That's for the entire law firm, is going to have every legal entity in one place. The second principle is data-driven entity management. So instead of files and documents, we're going to move to data, which will allow us to deliver more value and more client engagement. And the third principle is this idea of related and unrelated entities, that there are those entities and individuals that we have an active role in managing, and then those that just are owners and want to appear on the organizational chart. We'll see examples of all 3 of those principles when we turn to Registry. So when we look at Registry, we're going to look at an entity record. We're going to look at the organizational documents that we have added, and we will look at owners and percentages and maybe look at a preliminary organizational chart for just this simple business. This is the corporate registry for our firm, Webinars and Presentations, LLP. We're logged in as Frank Keller, who's a fictitious lawyer for this law firm. All of this data is just demo data. None of it is real. And you'll see we have a legal name, jurisdiction, form of organization, incorporation date, and we've used these tags to help with the presentation to focus on certain entities at a time, and then when these things were updated. So we want to just look at our startup entities. So we'll look for those startups. And here we have Abe Client, Helen Client, and Lemonade Software LLC. So this is the power of the entity registry, is that everything is in one place. But you'll notice that Angel Investor Co. is not in the corporate registry. The reason for that is that Angel Investor Co. is an unrelated entity. So they will show up as an owner when we look at Lemonade Software LLC, but not in our registry because we are not actively managing that entity. So with that, we'll look at data-driven entity management by zeroing in on Lemonade Software LLC. So here is everything we know about Lemonade Software LLC. The top panel will show basic information about this LLC, their address, jurisdiction, form of organization, their status, any tags or notes. Now you'll notice that there aren't things like trade names or DBAs, foreign authorizations. That's because there's another place where that is specifically managed and available to us. Down here, we have additional information about this entity. So we have access to all the documents that relate to this entity. Requirements will include things like annual reports and statements and other requirements. Ownership will be the owners and subsidiaries related to this entity. People will include our officers and directors, which we'll do later. Alerts and tasks that will help us manage entities when we get to larger endeavors. So for documents, we want to add those organizational documents. You'll notice that we currently have two. We have these bylaws and this membership agreement. I want to point out a couple of things here. The bylaws don't have an effective or expiration date. We certainly could have added those, but many organizational documents don't have an expiration date per se. And the reason that's important from an entity management perspective is that if you add an expiration date, you have the ability to generate a notification before that expiration. So annual statements and reports are the most obvious example about when you would want notifications. But if you were managing, for example, officer and director insurance, so maybe you're putting a D&O policy in here as an example. So we'll just say other, and we'll just say D&O, certificate of insurance. There's no jurisdiction. We don't really have a type here for that. So we'll just say other. We'll go add a D&O policy. We'll just grab a random document to illustrate this. And we want to add a document term. So we want to say that is effective the 1st of August, and maybe it lasts a full year as well. And then we want to get a notification or an alert for that automatically. And maybe we want that 30 days before the expiration. We'll just add Frank here as the recipient of that. We could even add a special message if we wanted to. So by doing that, we have allowed this to Registry to send us automatic notifications about the expiration of this D&O policy so that we can take action on it. It doesn't have to be 30 days. It could be 15, 123, whatever you want. But my point is that it can be this is a place to keep all the documents that relate to this entity in one place. Now let's look at ownership. So we talked about related and unrelated entities, and here we see evidence of it. So Angel Investor Co. was not in our primary registry, but they are listed here as an owner, which makes sense. They're an independent entity. They're a third-party arm's length transaction. They have a 40% interest in Lemonade Software LLC. Helen has 30, and Abe has 30 as well. And so the adding of those unrelated entities is really simple. We just click add and we'll be able to add those. So if you take on other investors, for example, we'll be able to add those really simply. They'll be available as investors to any entity in the registry, but they won't actually appear on the registry because they'll be unrelated. We don't represent them. And we can, of course, see a simple organizational chart of this entity. It'll be fairly simple with just our three owners, but that was generated automatically. So one of the ways we can engage with clients when we have a data-driven approach to entity management is the ability to automatically generate organizational charts. This particular chart is not so interesting because it's just our two founders and outside investor. But as we get to more elaborate examples like the corporate structure, we'll see that it can be far more elaborate and far more interesting to share with the client. So those were the three principles we wanted to show: the entity registry, the data-driven approach to entity management, where all of this data is collected in one place, and when it comes to ownership, the difference between related and unrelated entities so that we can generate an accurate org chart but not clutter the registry with entities that we don't actively manage. It looks like there's a question online, and the question is, can you practice entity management without entity management software? And the answer is yes. You can certainly bring together a combination of spreadsheets, calendars, document management, manual org chart drawing, and that's great. You can do all of these things. The principles that we've outlined are going to apply no matter what approach you take. It's just that entity management software makes it much easier and more efficient and delivers a higher quality work product at the end. But you can certainly do all of that in other applications, stringing them together. Sharing all of that with other clients, if you choose to go down that path, will of course be more difficult. It looks like there's another question, which is, can I use Registry or other entity management without sharing access with clients? And absolutely. In fact, that's the most common situation where lawyers don't want to share the internal system with clients just want to be able to provide the output. That's certainly quite common and easy to do, but you can also use it as a platform for sharing with them if you want. Now let's turn to the family business situation. In this example, we have the Evans family. We have a couple of parents, Williams and Sarah. They have 2 children, some advisors, and we're going to focus on Family Office Inc., which is the primary business entity that they're using for their constellation of businesses. But as we'll see, there's a group of individuals involved with this family enterprise. There's a trust, and then there are a variety of legal entities with cross-ownership and cross-management. So in this sort of more complex environment, the principles we want to focus on for entity management are generating a company organizational chart when you have a more complex ownership structure. We want to deploy officers and directors across multiple entities really easily. Because it's a family office, a lot of these individuals and their advisors are serving in multiple roles across all of the entities in the corporate family. And we want to be able to set terms of service for those officers and directors. And that will allow us in the future to look back and say who was on the board in 2018. And if we're setting up terms of service, we can do that. So as we look at demonstrating this in Registry, we'll create a complex ownership structure, look at an example, we'll assign some officers and directors to another entity, and we'll set up those terms of service and see what that might look like as we're managing our officers and directors. So here we are in Registry in the corporate registry. We'll search for all of our entities in this family office. And you can see Family Office Inc., the primary entity we're going to look at in a moment. But we also have Sarah Evans and William Evans listed here. You'll notice their children are not here. We'll talk about where they appear in a little bit. And we have a variety of other entities that are in this sort of corporate family more generally. But we're going to take a look at the Family Office Inc. as our example company to look at. And it currently doesn't have any documents like we went through with the Lemonade Software LLC, but you could certainly add them and manage them here. You'll see that we have Family Office Inc. It has a legal address and a headquarters address. It has a jurisdiction. It's a corporation. It has an incorporation date. It's active. And we have this tag Family Office just for purposes of this demo, and then some notes about this legal entity as well. And what we want to do is start with the ownership structure and take a look at it. So with ownership in entity management, you want to be able to support a complex structure, but still make it easy for people to create the ownership structure. And that can be a challenging balance to strike. And so the way that works in Registry is we ask you to take care of the immediate parents and any immediate subsidiaries. Don't worry about grandparents and great-grandparents or great-grandchildren and so on. Just focus on immediate parents and immediate direct subsidiaries, and Registry will do the rest. And we'll see an example of that. So here, Family Office has 4 parents: the Evans Family Trust, William Evans, Sarah Evans, and Family Corp Distributors LLC with their various percentages. For purposes of this demo, these are whole numbers, but of course they don't have to be. And then this entity, Family Office Inc. here, has 2 subsidiaries, Southern Retail Group and Johnson Pack and Ship. And those 2 entities may have their own subsidiaries and affiliates which will show up. And then these entities here may have their own corporate structure above them. But we don't see any of that because we're just focused on the immediate parents and subsidiaries for the Family Office Inc. To see the corporate structure that's built from these immediate parents and subsidiaries, we'll select the chart button, which will generate this organizational chart. And it does that automatically by crawling all of the ownership relationships in Registry. So this is the benefit of a data-driven approach. So if we select Family Office here, you'll see that we have Sarah Evans as a direct owner. The Evans Family Trust owns its ownership in the Family Office Inc. And then Family Corp Distributors LLC is here too. But we said there were 4 owners of this entity, and the 4th is William Evans, but he's listed up here. So we might ask, why is that? Well, the reason is that William Evans owns Family Office Inc. both directly and indirectly. So he has an ownership relationship with Family Corp Distributors LLC, which in turn is an owner of the Family Office Inc. And so you have this line here and then this line here showing that indirect ownership relationship. But he is also a direct owner. So William Evans owns Family Office Inc. directly, and that's what this line shows. So this is what we call generation skipping. So Lextree has automatically preserved the generational structure, and it's showing that there is an entity between William Evans and the family office, but it doesn't mask that he has a direct relationship. It shows that with this line here. If this line were drawn to pass directly from William Evans into Family Corp and then through, you would visually not know that William Evans was both a direct and indirect owner. It would appear that he was only an indirect owner because the line would be hidden by passing through here. So a data-driven approach that automatically preserves these relationships will show the generation skipping as well as the indirect ownership. The next thing I want to show is that Family Office Inc. was listed as having two subsidiaries, Johnson Pack and Ship, Southern Retail Group. But all of these entities down here have come along for the ride because our data-driven approach, as Lextree crawls all of those ownership relationships in the corporate family, it says, oh, I found subsidiaries of Johnson Pack and Ship. So it continues to build out those subsidiary relationships and it adds Brass Distributors and Brandon Trucking. It then goes a step further to say, does Brass Distributors Inc. have a subsidiary? And the answer is yes, it does. It's Metal Polishing Partners. And so this is several layers down in the generational structure, but Lextree is going to show all of that because this is data that it can analyze and draw the chart. Likewise, with Southern Retail Group, it's going to show these three subsidiaries. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that the line configuration is different than over here, and that's because all three of these entities are direct subsidiaries of Southern Retail Group, that there is no ownership relationship between them. And the reason it shows this way is it's trying to maximize space in that case and show them in this clustered approach. So that is the entire corporate structure for Family Office Inc. And we were able to see that at a glance because we took this data-driven approach to ownership. We were able to generate an org chart automatically without drawing boxes and lines and keeping it all straight. We were able to let some software look at that data, analyze it, and create these generational structures and optimize the layout configuration. So we're back to the entity record. We've looked at ownership and generating that organizational chart. We now want to look at officers and directors. And in our case, that's under this People's tab. And here in the Family Office Inc., we can see that we have several directors. We have 4 directors. We have 3 officers, and we have an other, someone else who is involved in some managerial capacity that we want to keep track of. Now, these directors are William Evans, his wife Sarah Evans, Dayla Evans, their daughter, and Andy Advisor, an outside advisor to the family. It might be accountant, financial advisor, friend of the family, what have you, someone who is appointed to a director role on the board of directors for this corporation. And then there are 3 officers, Sonny Evans, their son, Dayla Evans, their daughter, and Laura Lawyer also serves as the secretary of the corporation, as she is also the general counsel. And you'll see that they all have different appointment dates. In the event any of them leave, we will be able to set a termination date, and that will allow us to run reports in the future to show who was on the board during 2018 or 17, or who was an officer during a certain period of time. If we're capturing that term of service data with the appointment and termination, we'll be able to run those reports and see that. But let's first assign some other roles here. Let's imagine, for example, we want Andy Advisor to also be an officer. We'll make him the chief investment officer, the CIO of this entity as well. And so to do that, we'll just add a person. And because we have a data-driven approach to entity management, all of the individuals that are in our corporate family for officers and director roles will appear here. So I can simply select Andy Advisor. He's already a director, so we want to make him an officer, and we will make him the CIO. And let's imagine that we're going to appoint him today, but we could add an expiration date as well if we wanted to do that. And so we simply add Andy in this second capacity. And what this means is we can assign officers and directors multiple roles to different entities and keep track of all of that easily. So here's Andy Advisor, CIO. Now, to illustrate this point further, let's go to a different entity. We'll go to Family Corp Distributors, LLC. This has no people, no officers and directors. So let's add some quickly. The first thing we'll do is we will, of course, make William a director. We might even make him the chair. Now, this assumes that this LLC bylaws is structured to allow for a board of directors, of course. So we'll just make that assumption for the time being. We could have checked track service, terms of service, and added an appointment date. We'll just skip that for the time being. We will also add Andy Advisor, and we'll make Andy a director as well. And now I have two directors. And let's imagine I want one independent manager for this person that's an LLC. And so we're going to have Sonny, their son, will actually be an officer. And because it's an LLC, we'll just call him manager and appoint him there. What's powerful about this is now that I have William Evans and Andy Evans as directors of this entity, and I have an officer appointed as well. And all I did was create a link between that entity and these individuals. The power of that approach is that we can get a look at each individual and see what their roles are. So for example, if we come to view people and organizations, this is a quick and dirty way to get this information. And here what we'll do is we'll just look for William, and we can see that William is the director of these two entities. But we could also ask, what about Andy? Well, Andy has three different roles. Andy is the director of this LLC, the director of this one, and the officer here. And if we want to know about Dela, their daughter, we can see that she is the director of Family Office Inc., and she's an officer, the president and CEO as well. Both with different appointment dates, I should point out as well, which is handy to know and be able to set independently. So really easy management. It's an easy way to show who is on what boards, who is serving in what capacity as an officer or a director for any entity in the corporate family. So we can go back to Family Office and look at all these officers and directors. Now let's imagine that Andy was to leave as an officer or director. We can select Andy. We can add a term expiration for that as well. And we want to set him to inactive. And we can say that he was inactive as of the 6th. And we'll just say he changed his role. And voila, he is removed from that. But we can always go see that history. And we can see in the inactive list that Andy was a director between December 2015 and August 2019, and that he's currently inactive and that he changed his role as of that date. And that is now data that we can report on and analyze because we have captured that term of service data for each officer and director, both their appointment date and their expiration date. As an aside, if you're in a jurisdiction or with an organization such as a nonprofit that sets officers and directors for a certain term in advance, so a board of directors serves for 2 years, let's say, in Registry, you can actually proactively set the expiration date, the term of service, or the termination date. So if someone got appointed today, for example, you could say they are going to leave in 2021, and then you could actually set an alert in advance to notify you that that term was expiring. And you'll have to do that once, and you'll get that notification automatically. So in some jurisdictions, depending on how the board is constituted, you might know that that's set up in advance, or if you're in a nonprofit where the bylaws call for fixed terms and elections maybe of the officers, this can be a handy feature as well. Often not needed in the case of private family companies, of course, but maybe handy in other circumstances. So those are the three things we wanted to show: creating a corporate organizational chart, a complex organizational chart that showed generation skipping, preserving the generational levels, and then automatically discovering deeper relationships in the org chart. So we don't have to do that. We're leveraging the data-driven entity management to create that organizational chart. We wanted to create and assign officers and directors to multiple entities really easily, and we wanted to track their terms of service. So those three principles are really important and useful in a family office or family constellation of family businesses that are structured in this sort of way with individuals, trusts, and a variety of legal organizational chart and a more complicated business that intersects with their requirements for entity management. As way of background, they are a single parent corporate entity. In other words, there's one parent at the top that owns all of the entities that we are managing, and we'll see that in the organizational chart structure. They operate a variety of holding and operating companies, and we can see that in the organizational chart, and it's also a global business. And so each legal entity is incorporated in a different jurisdiction for a particular purpose. And that is quite common for large international companies, and it increases the complexity from a governance and compliance perspective, and we can use entity management to resolve many of those risks that arise from such a business. And that brings us to the three principles that we're going to talk about that relate to a large corporate client like this and entity management. The first principle is that we want to manage multiple jurisdictions. So we're worried about more than just the place of incorporation and the principal place of business. We are concerned about all of the jurisdictions where all of the entities are doing business. So where are their filings due? Where are their permits? What are those compliance and governance obligations that we need to track across all the jurisdictions where they are working? The second principle is that we want to be able to collaborate both within the law firm, but also maybe with our clients as well on getting work done as it relates to those jurisdictions and those compliance requirements. And then we want to bring all that together and look at our compliance and governance obligations. We'll also maybe look at some of the documents and notifications that we can set up around that to improve compliance and governance as well. As we look at Registry to illustrate some of these principles, we'll look at setting up those jurisdictions and managing them. We'll look at tasks and how we can collaborate on tasks throughout Registry, and then we'll look specifically at the requirements feature, which is the principal tool in which compliance and governance obligations are satisfied or managed in Registry, just by way of example. So here we are back on the corporate registry from Registry. We will look at those entities that relate to our corporate client. And in this example, there are 15 of them, and we'll have Fast Service Co. at the top. But you'll see that we have a number of entities in all sorts of jurisdictions. So we have Asia Pack Distribution, which is a Delaware LLC, which will serve as a holding company. We have a Canadian distributor here. We have an Irish technology licensing company. We have another Canadian firm. We have two Brazilian entities. We have an Australian entity in New South Wales. We have a German organization and a South African one. Part of the point I want to make here is that depending on what jurisdiction you're working in, you may have filings at a state or provincial level. In the case of the United States, we have Delaware and New York. And Australia and New South Wales. But in other jurisdictions, you may simply have national filings. So in Ireland, for example, Germany, you'll have national filings for a lot of your corporate registrations and compliance obligations. And then you may be in jurisdictions that have a hybrid. In Canada, for example, you have both provincial and national or federal filings. And so Registry can accommodate all of that, and we'll display them accordingly. Now we'll go to Fast Service Co. And here we are as Fast Service Co. We have a Delaware jurisdiction. They've been around a long time, and they're a corporation. We don't have any address information, so Registry is just going to pare down what it shows us. We've started with a base of data that we'll come back to in a minute, but in the documents area, we have some Q1 meeting minutes that we can manage, and we actually have a collection of documents called meetings where all of our meeting documents are stored. And then we have requirements. Briefly, we'll go to the ownership just to illustrate the structure. So I said this was a single parent corporate entity, and that's why it has no parent. So obviously, theoretically, it has shareholders. Maybe it's publicly traded. We're not going to list all of the public company, all the people that own individual stock in Fast Service Co. we're just going to start with it as the ultimate parent for all practical purposes. And then it has 3 subsidiaries, the Europe, Middle East, Africa Manufacturing Group, Asia Pacific Distribution, and the Brazil Group. And we can take a look at that. It's obviously only 3 subsidiaries, but if we generate the organizational chart, Lextry is going to crawl the entire org chart and find a number of relationships. So if we focus on Fast Service Co., for example, you'll see we have the EMEA Manufacturing, Asia Pacific Distribution, and the Brazil Group as well. But the structure goes much deeper than that. So we have these Europe, Middle East, and Africa companies, EMEA Sales, Technology Licensors, Service Co. We have this Africa Service Co., an IP licensing entity as well. We have this Asia Distribution Holding Company that has direct ownership in a few entities here, and then the Brazil Group over on the side as well. So this corporate structure is about 4 or 5 layers deep, but it could obviously be a lot deeper as well. And we see that a lot. Some organizational charts are tall and have many, many layers. Others are quite broad and shallow, or a mix of those things. Lextry will automatically generate all those relationships regardless of how complicated the organizational structure is. So we'll come back to the requirements area and take a look at some of these things. So the requirements is where all of our compliance obligations are housed. And Lextry, for practical purposes, will distinguish between annual reports and statements and then other requirements. So we're going to elevate and prioritize those annual statements. Now, some legal entities in some jurisdictions might actually have annual reports filed in more than one jurisdiction. So you can actually accommodate that. If you had multiple annual reports for a single entity in different jurisdictions, you can easily accommodate that. And we see that it's not terribly common, but it does certainly happen. And in this case, we have our 2019 annual report. It's for Delaware. It has an initial registration date. The next one is due in September of 2019, and it happens every year. What's important about the recurring period is that not all compliance obligations or filing obligations are annual, and you can actually use entity management solutions like Lextry to set up longer term or even shorter filing periods. So if you were in a jurisdiction that required a filing every 3 years or 5 or 7, you could easily set this to be those number of years. And then if you have an alert, so in this case, there's a notification that will go out 30 days before that due date, then August 1st in this example, then Lextry will automatically update that alert every year. So as the new filing obligation shifts to August or September 1st, 2020, then the alert will automatically be updated to 2020 as well. So you only have to configure that once, and then it runs in perpetuity to notify whomever you want and need. And then if we look at other requirements, in this example, because of the global nature of it, we can see the effect of these jurisdictions on our filings. So even though it's a Delaware corporation, it has global filings. Now, in this case, we've assigned the shipping permit and agent notifications for Singapore and Brazil. Now, probably these filings actually belong at the entity that are operating there. So it would be at the Brazil company. This would be at the Singaporean shipping company, as it were. And you could certainly do that, and that would make more sense if that's where the filings belong. But in this case, for purposes of this demo, we wanted to just show multiple jurisdictions in a single legal entity. So if you have an entity that is having to do filings across multiple jurisdictions, that's very easy to do. So in this case, we have some permit for shipping that we need to file in Singapore. We've classified it as a permit. This is an entirely customizable bit of data, so you can have different types of requirements depending on your business. So if you transported waste products on a regular basis, you might have hazardous waste permits and solid waste permits and non-hazardous permitting. So you can have a whole classification for the types of materials you were shipping. But if you weren't in the shipping business at all, you wouldn't have any of those, and you could classify your compliance requirements in an entirely different way if you chose. So in this case, this is permission to dock ships with a certain tonnage in Singapore, and it has a due date. as well and we might want to set an alert or notification for that. And then you'll see we have this agent notification. So we have to notify the government when we have sales representatives that are conducting business in Brazil in our name. And so we have some filing due for them. There's no due date in this particular case, although we could certainly add one easily. As you build up these requirements, they're available to you as reports across the entire corporate family. So even if we had assigned these requirements to those other entities, they would show up in our reports. And instead of saying Fast Service Co., it would show the legal entity to which the compliance obligation was assigned. So this is one of the powerful things of entity management software. You can actually look at compliance obligations for the entire corporate family, not just a single entity. They could all come together in one place. So we'll see, if we had multiple annual reports, they would all show up here as an example. In this particular case, if we wanted to look at the dashboard, for example, we would see all of those requirements by jurisdiction on our dashboard as well, which may be valuable to you. So if we go back to Fast Service Co., we see our requirements and we can set up notifications for those. So let's take this Singapore example and we'll add an automatic notification for this. So here's our shipping permit. It's for Singapore, but again, any jurisdiction we want, we can add that we need to it. If we had to add a new one, we could certainly do that. These types, again, fully customizable. If it were an annual report for another jurisdiction, we could simply check this box, and then we would see some other options as well. Then here are details about the filing, any other notes we want, and its due date. And then Registry will ask us, is this a recurring due date? And we'll say yes. We need to actually do this every 3 years. It says whatever regulation this relates to in Singapore. And then we will get an alert for this. And in this case, we'll say 10 days before, but maybe we want to change that and we want to say 45 days. And we can have that alert repeat if we want. In this case, we'll just do one alert. And then we can choose all the recipients we want. So this is an example of collaboration, both with a client and also within the law firm. So anyone can receive an alert in Registry for anything, including a requirement, a document, filing, what have you. And if they are a user, they'll automatically be in the list. If they're not a user, you can still send them notification. They will not get access to Registry in the data, but they will get a notification about this particular item, as it were. So let's imagine you had a shipping agent, maybe an import-export advisor that wanted to know about this coming due. You could add that person to this recipients list. They would get notification, but they wouldn't get access to the overall entity data. But in this case, Frank and Sun and Joan are all members of the law firm, and they're all working on this client matter. And so all three of them will get notification as well. And so we can add that automatic notification. And because we have made this due date recur every 3 years, what will happen is in 2019, the date will automatically update to 2022, 3 years out, and so will the alert. So we've configured it once, Registry remembers it, and will remind us again in 3 years without any problem whatsoever. So that's the first example of being able to collaborate. It's a very simple way to collaborate within the firm or with a client or even other external parties that may have an interest in some of the data in here. For more elaborate collaboration, we can go to the tasks area. And let's imagine that Singaporean shipping actually requires some work to be done with our Admiralty or Maritime practice group, and our corporate group need to work together on this. So we're going to create a task. We'll assign that, and we will say update Singapore shipping application. And then we can assign that to, and this will be everyone who is a user in the application. So again, Sun and Joan and Frank are all members of the firm. So we'll choose Sun and Frank as people that are assigned to this task. We can say whether they both have to do it or just one of them. We just want one of them to do it in this example. And then we can assign a due date to this. So we'll push this one out a little ways. And we can also make the task recurring. And we can say, yes, This occurs maybe every 3 years as well. So we do the filing, but then we want to prepare the next filing in advance, maybe, and we can say every 3 years, and we can assign this task to them. When does that future notification arise? And we'll say 100 days before it's actually due. It'll show up, or you can do something more reasonable like 30 days or 40 days beforehand. And we'll say it only has to show up when we've completed the other one. So if you had something like a tax filing where the government doesn't really care whether you filed the last one or not in terms of filing the next one, you don't want to make this contingent on completion. You want to have the next one be automatically updated. So the 2019 tax filing is going to be followed automatically by the 2020 filing. Whereas in this case, if you haven't filed the previous application, you probably don't need to file the next application, or the next application won't be available to work on until you've fixed the first one. So this is a way of thinking about whether you need to have those tasks appear all the time, kind of no matter what's happened before, or whether you can make them contingent on each other. And we'll make this one contingent. If we have a draft document or a form, we can certainly add that and upload the form as well. If not, we can leave it undone. Now, the moment we create that task, both Frank and Son have received notification that they have a new task that they need to work on. And here it is, update that Singaporean shipping application. And they can click on that link in their email and go there. It will also show up on their dashboard. It will show up in the tasks area as well. And then when they go and look at it, it will be a place of collaboration. So there's a lot going on here. There is a lot more data that might appear here under certain circumstances. But here we have the progress. There's been 0 of 1 step. It's assigned to Son and Frank. Frank is the one that asked for it. It has its due date. It's recurring. Here's the returning period. And we can begin to work together. You'll notice that we can add documents, we can comment, and we can complete this task. And so if we were to upload additional documents, we can say, yes, and we'll just say initial draft, and we can go grab a document, as it were. And we've added our first document to this task, and the document history will be listed here. And as we work on and revise that document, we'll be able to upload additional snapshots of it, and that will be available to us. And then, of course, we can mark this as complete when we're done. And we want to upload a new document. But people can collaborate within the firm on this task, and once it's done, those buttons disappear because the work has been completed. And so it will no longer appear in our task area. It will show up in the completed task here and show when it was done. But because it's recurring, a new one will show up. We said 40 days before the next due date. And so 40 days before 9/20/2020, or what do we say, 3 years out, I think, it will show up in our task queue automatically for us. So it's not going to be there in progress until then because of the way we configured that. So that's a way. Those are two ways that you can collaborate both within the firm and across with the client, or even with external parties. So if they're users, they can collaborate on tasks, and you can make anyone a user in Registry that you want. They do not have to be members of the firm. If you want to give them permission and access, you can certainly do that. And then in the documents area and in requirements, we can also add alerts and notifications. So in this Alliance disclosure example, we have a due date for this document. So this is in our agreements folder. We have some non-disclosure agreement with a potential alliance party. There's no jurisdiction really relevant, even though, of course, the contract will refer to a jurisdiction, but it's not a jurisdictional filing. If we wanted to add that, we certainly could select this if we wanted to. We've already uploaded the document, the date, but notice it has an effective date and an expiration date. And because of that, we can set an alert, and we'll default to 30 days before that expiration date, and we'll have Frank and Joan receive this particular alert and notification. So my point is that with compliance requirements and documents, you can set up alerts and notifications so that Registry will automatically keep help you keep the entity in compliance and stay on top of all of those obligations related to documents and filings. And then with tasks, you can actually collaborate by uploading versions of documents and commenting on the task and working together to get work done. And then that task reporting is available to show who's done what and when things are overdue, if they are as well. So that'll keep you on task as well. So those are the three core principles we wanted to talk about: managing multiple jurisdictions, collaboration within the firm, and compliance and governance requirements. And so that's what we gathered from our corporate client, much more sophisticated operation, but Registry gives us the tools to track all of those things.